we can start our January 22 London Developer Group meetup. Not really a meetup, virtual, Omicron version of a meetup. Um, Today we're going to be talking about Spring 22, which is coming out really soon on production. This one kind of snuck up on me. I wasn't really sure what's happening there. I just started seeing new features on sandboxes I was working on. I didn't realize it was coming so soon. Um, right, we had our little chat. Now we're going to be talking about the Spring 22 highlights today, and then we'll be chatting some more. So make sure you you take the time to prepare some decent jokes. I don't know, or come up with questions about the upcoming release. As always, thank you to our sponsors, BrightGen, for organizing this Zoom call, and Mobile Caddy. Are they recording this? Maybe they'll upload
They
it to
do
YouTube.
post-production on the recording.
Okay. So thanks to Mobile Caddy as well for always being by our side. Before we get started, some community stuff. So as we mentioned, and you may already know, Spring 22 is coming up very soon, 5th of February. You can try it out right now in sandboxes. There are some very nice things in there that you should check out, especially if you're a developer. And well, Keir will tell you exactly what, but some things are really worth trying out if you can. London's call for speakers is still open until the 13th. So if you have some good ideas, stuff you want to talk about, experiences you want to share with the rest of us, here's the website, londonscalling.net/CFP. Idea exchange prioritization is open until the 17th of February. So that's your chance to influence what Salesforce will develop next. Basically, if enough people complain about the same thing, they fix it. Then Trailblazer DX is an in-person event in San Francisco. So if you are, what are the entry criteria to the United States these days? I'm assuming you probably have to be like Quanta jabbed or something. But if you can make it to San Francisco in April, there you go. Mark this on your calendar. We will be back in person next month. I know it says hopefully, but we will be back in person next month. If you want to talk about anything today, or if you're just tired of listening to my voice, we also have a Twitter handler that you can chat, talk, complain about us. That's LandDevSFDC. As always, if there's anything else you want to share with us, reach out. We're always here for you. So we're going to start with Keir, talking about Spring 22, and see what cool things we've got happening this month. Keir, over to you.
Why, thank you. Let me find something to share. So the quiz aspect of this today is going to be done in Kahoot rather than our mechanism we've used previously. So I'm just going to pop that in the chat where you need to go to get Kahoot. If you want to hit that on your mobile device or whatever, you'll need to be on that to put in the game pin to then be able to answer the quiz questions and attempt to win a certification voucher. Ooh, in fact, we've got two up for grabs. So first and second, we'll get one. Right. Wasn't the right thing to do. Just one sec. Slideshow. Awesome. Right. So Spring 22 release. A few goodies in here. It's interesting because I always do a webinar for BrightGen where I go through, but I'm looking more at kind of business user type things. So I skim over some of the developer things and I go back to those afterwards and think, oh, actually, it's not as bad a release as I thought it was. There's some nice stuff in there. So the first thing that's coming, Lightning Web Security. So basically, this is going GA in Spring 22. It's been around for a little while in beta. And this is basically what is replacing the Locker service for Lightning Web Components. So Locker is still going to be around for Aura, but this is going to be the new way of securing your Lightning Web Components. And like everything else, Lightning Web Component side of things, it's all standard based. So it uses modern technology rather than being some weird thing that they've tried to brute force in after the event. The release notes say most existing Lightning Web components just work. So that's obviously really encouraging. I would certainly advocate testing to make sure that things do work, because probably if even one of your existing Lightning components doesn't quite work correctly, that will mess a few things up for you. This works by virtualizing the browser environment. So effectively all of your components in your namespace sit in their own sandbox. And it's on or off for the whole org. Whereas in Aura, you can turn off the locker service by changing the API version and putting it to pre-API 40. You do lose a lot of other functionality as well, but you can flip it off if you need to, if you've got an old component in there. Lightning Web Components, when you turn this on, it's on. So you can turn it on or turn it off, but you can't go piecemeal. So this is effectively what happens. You've got your browser, which is the host environment for everything. Then you've got the Lightning Web Security Virtualization Engine, and then it has different sandboxes for different namespaces. So each of your personal namespace sits in there. If you've got things from managed packages, they can sit in there in their own virtual environment, so you can't easily reach in and do anything with them. So decent security. So rather than using the secure wrapper approach that the locker service used, so that basically, when you asked for a window object, you would get something that was wrapped up and things were proxied, and it was all used to go a bit clunky. And when it went wrong, it was really difficult to find out what on earth was going on, because this was a secure wrapper. You couldn't really get it, any aspect of it. This uses distortion, so it actually manipulates the code for that sandbox, and it does that in order to do things like filter the content. So when you try and access cookies, you can only access the cookies that you put in there and should be available to your sandbox. Same with local storage. You can't cross into another namespace's local storage and start looking at that. It'll strip out malicious code. I mean, yeah, that's always a good thing. You can never argue about that. And it restricts access to some properties so that you can only access the things that you should be able to. What Lightning Web Security gives us, which I don't believe we've had any mechanism for up to now, it's been really annoying, is cross namespace Lightning Web components. So you can embed a Lightning Web component from another namespace, whereas before you had to wrap things in Aura components, which always felt a bit dirty and a bit clunky. This won't be immediately enabled as the release goes live. It starts rolling out once as Spring 22 goes live, but you will get a notification. They say at least a month in advance, which kind of sounds like it won't be rolling out at all on day one, because I haven't seen many notifications. But if you haven't got custom Lightning Web components in your org, you won't get any notification, and it won't be enabled for you. So it'll only be enabled when you need it. It's not turned on by default. Orchestrator. Orchestrator, I actually think, is really cool, and this is probably the thing that's got me most excited about the low code, no code side of things. So Orchestrator's GA in Spring 22. It's kind of like Flow on steroids, I guess. It's complex process automation, so it's not just like a straightforward process builder or a flow that has particular entry point. Automation hits a record at various points throughout its life cycle, so the orchestration has entry points to various stages. I think what's interesting about that is it kind of, I think, moves you away from thinking about this action happened in the database, therefore I need to do something, to looking at a record and thinking throughout the life cycle of this record, where do I need to attach automation? So it kind of gets you thinking about it from the business perspective rather than from the technical perspective. Yeah, and it basically starts and stops the automation based on criteria. I did think about trying to put together a demo, but because it's kind of everything is flows, and you have stages that are flows that are built up of multiple flows, and you have flows for entry and exit evaluation. You just end up having to write a lot of flows, and if you don't think about it, like I didn't, it quickly goes nowhere and it's problematic. So I didn't do that in the end. But basically your automation gets applied in stages, which is a collection of steps, and each of those steps is one or more flows. So it's another way of assembling automation as well. Rather than having to have one flow that does everything, you can join these flows together. And I think the steps can run in parallel. The stages run in serial. There's no control over that, but I believe you can get the steps to run in parallel. So you can have whichever one finishes first wins type of thing. One of the changes with it being generally available is the entry-exit evaluation flows. So basically, to exit a stage or to enter or exit a step, rather than just having a simple condition, you can have a flow that executes that can then obviously do things like reach out to other objects, check the status of various parts of the system, and then have quite a sophisticated rule as to whether an action is taken. And basically, you have a flow that sets the is orchestration condition met variable to true when the criteria are met. And basically, if that is set to true, then the action will happen, but it can be complicated as opposed to a simple condition. And another change for the GA is that the interactive steps, rather than assigning to an individual user, you can assign it to groups or queues. So that everyone gets told there's a bunch of work waiting to be done. And the first to complete the flow wins, which in theory means you could get 20 people all trying to do that piece of work, and 19 of them are wasting their time because number 18 comes in and wins it. But hey ho, such is life. Again, difference from the beta, you can trigger it from custom code, either from Apex or through an API call, using much the same mechanism as launching a flow. And there's a bit more UI around it as well. So in a record detail page, you've got a standard Lightning Web component that you can drop in. And if a user has some work that has been assigned to them, when they open the record detail page, which they may do from an email notification, they will see the work that is awaiting them, and they will be able to crack on with that. And as I said before, potentially so will 19 other people. So don't hang around, really, or either hang around a lot or don't hang around at all. Really, you're in a bit of a race there. So decide if you want to take part. But you complete the work in the page. So your record page becomes your workspace. And there's also some monitoring and debugging tools that have been added. So the ability to view the status of an orchestration, to cancel those that are running. You can debug an in-progress one. I'd recommend you only ever do that in the sandbox. That's a really good way to screw things up in production. But if one fails in production, then you can debug that and see what went wrong. Next up, some stuff on Flow. So Flow Builder, the auto layout is GA in Spring 22. I haven't done an awful lot of flows in the last couple of years, but I've always used auto layout. So it's a bit of a surprise to me, actually, that it was still in beta. There's a nice component called filter collection. So if you want to strip out a bunch of records from a collection, rather than having to iterate them yourself and build up a new collection, you can use this component if it's a simple condition that allows you to decide whether to keep it or not. You can use this component and do it all in a single action. And monitoring debugging tools is left over from the previous slide. So yeah, I wouldn't take too much notice of that. Flow Trigger Explorer, I did want to show this one because it's actually really nice, and I wish they did something similar for code rather than low code. So I'm just going to open my pre-release org. Hurrah. Right, now how did I get to it? I think it was flows. Flow Trigger Explorer. So what this is quite a nice way of seeing what automations are in place when record trigger flow is activated. So you can see at this point, when an opportunity record is created, these things happen. When an account record is created, these things happen. So you get to see what's happening and also what order things are happening in, rather than having to go and look at your code base like you do with things like triggers. So yeah, be nice if we could have something like this for code, really. But it is really quite neat. So definitely have a look at that, and really useful for admins, I think, as well, especially once you've installed a few managed packages that have banged in a few flows for you. It's a really nice way of visualizing it. Right. Flipping back to my Google, it was a short demo, wasn't it? That was all I had time to put together when I was putting this slide deck together yesterday. But still, I thought I'd do something. Did something live. That's the important thing. Record triggered flow ordering. Again, something I would really like us to have when we're writing triggers in code. But I guess this is what happens when you build a new engine for things rather than using one that's been around for 15, 20 years. So basically, each flow, you can give it a number between 1 and 2,000. And they are run in ascending order. So number 1 runs first. And 2000 runs last if you go out that far. If you've got the same number, collisions, they run in API name order. I'm assuming that's API name order ascending, so the A's run first. That isn't actually very well documented at the moment, but I'm hoping that will come through. But then you've got a nuance to this. So 1 to 1000 run first, then those that haven't got a value specified run in the order that you created them, just to confuse matters. And then 1001 to 2000 run next. And this is obviously, I say obviously, it's scoped to the type of flow. So 1 to 2000 before saves will run, then 1 to 2000 after saves will run. You can't use this to make an after save run before a before save. And the best practice is to leave gaps, because you may want to insert something into that. So think back, those of us that did basic programming, you always started off with 10, 20, 30, 40, rather than doing 1, 2, 3, 4. And who knows, maybe in the fullness of time, like basic, we'll get a renumber operation that moves everything out into gaps of 10. But I actually think that's really powerful and really useful. And I do wish we had something like that for triggers. So who knows, maybe we will at some point in time. UTAM. This is really cool as well. I didn't really look at this too hard originally because there's quite a lot to it. UTAM is a UI test automation model. So this is basically trying to change the way that you do user interface testing to get away from having to describe things in code, essentially having to specify complicated selectors to determine where an element is on the page and to be able to access it. So what you do is, rather than describing it in code, you still have to describe it because you still need a mechanism for the engine to know what the page does look like. But you describe them as JSON page objects. So you the structure of the page is naturally represented there. And you also don't have to put everything in there. You can just put in the parts you want to test, as long as they're logically appropriate, that the parents and the children are correct. You can leave gaps. You don't have to describe every single aspect of it. And you just update those page objects when the UI changes, rather than having to go and change your code and your selectors and yada, yada, yada. So what you do is you test against the page object. And I can't really tell you the details of exactly how you wire that up. That's the bit that I haven't got to. It looks like you can hook it up to things like Scratch orgs. So it does work genuinely against a browser, but I haven't actually got as far as trying it out. All the samples look like they use you can use test framework of your choice. There's some samples with Jasmine, which is one of my favorites, I must admit. So the page object compiles to JavaScript or Java, so you can write tests in either of those. I'll be doing JavaScript, obviously. And what they can also do really nicely is cross the shadow boundary, so you don't have to worry about gaining access. I don't know if that's changed recently, but a couple of years ago when I was using Selenium, you had to effectively execute some JavaScript to allow you to get a reference that crossed the shadow boundary and then use that going forward. So it all got a bit clunky and asynchronous and promise-based at that point in time. Whereas this, you can just, in your page JSON object, you just say there's a shadow boundary here, and you're good. So here's an example. This is lifted straight off the site that I'll share with you later, the kind of documentation site. So yeah, that will seem very familiar when you get there. It's a very simple HTML page that basically has a div, and then inside that div there's a heading and there's a span inside of that, and it says hello world or hello world emojis. So the page JSON, you have to have a root in there. Then you have a selector that says what your root is, and in this case, CSS body. So we don't care about anything that comes before it, like HTML. And then we have the elements that sit within body. And again, this has just gone straight into world, which is a CSS selector of having a class of world. So if we go back and look at this, we've also got a div in there, and we've got an H1 in there. But because we don't care about those and not testing those, we don't have to worry about it. As long as we put the element with the class of world inside body, which we do, then that becomes available. And making it public true means that you can execute a method to access this from a test and say, give me that element, give me the contents of that element. And then in the test, and this is just regular node test type functionality, so this isn't using a JavaScript framework. You import the page that has the JavaScript page that has been compiled from that page JSON. And then basically use asynchronous code to load the page, check the page is okay, it goes and retrieves the element which has the hello world inside it. This world icon here, you just do hello world root, which is the root of the page, get world. And again, that goes back to the fact that this is public. So its name is world, it's public, therefore there's a method automatically generated called get world. And based on that, we can then get its text and check that it's equal to the emojis. So it's a really nice way of accessing the elements without having to have complex selectors and things within your page. Sorry, within your code. So if you go to utam.dev, that's the official site. That's got tutorials, guides. It's also got a playground, so you can play around with this live. And then if you go to the GitHub link shown, there's Salesforce UI samples for Spring 22, including getting it going against the Scratch org. I haven't tried it yet myself because, as I haven't had time, but it looks quite nice. Looks like it abstracts away a lot of the stuff that you normally have to worry about using something like a Selenium. Lightning Web Runtime on Node. So this is in developer preview, but it looks really interesting, so I thought I'd talk about it. So Lightning Web Runtime is the kind of new runtime that powers Experience Cloud. It's fully Lightning. It's a lot faster than the old Experience Cloud mechanism of doing it. I think it was originally codenamed Sabre back in the day a few years ago. So it's a few years building it. And it only works in experiences if you're using entirely Lightning Web components rather than Aura components. So with LWR on Node, you can run that somewhere else outside of Experience Cloud. So not managed by Salesforce, managed by you, entirely under your control. You can still use Lightning components and the Salesforce platform. I understand how you get Lightning components working. I'm not 100% sure yet how you get access to the Salesforce platform on it because the docs aren't really massively clear about that. But you can run this locally, just using Node at the command line. You can deploy it to Heroku, or you can run it elsewhere as well. So it's a way of building out websites, experiences that hook into Salesforce, but don't have the kind of limitations, maybe expense of Experience Cloud, on the assumption that you're happy to build it all yourself. So there's a developer guide for this at the short link shown. That's got a getting started aspect to it, templates and routing, as you expect with anything that allows you to build custom web servers these days, and a kind of slightly brief section on working with Lightning Web components. There's also a Trailblazer community topic. Note that it's not a Trailblazer community group. It's just a topic. Effectively, it's just a hashtag. So you won't see an awful lot of activity around that. Mostly it seems to be people trying to figure out how to use SLDS with their Lightning Web components when they are running it on Node. But hopefully that will change once it's kind of being plugged a bit more in the release notes. Apex Type Implementer. I liked this one. So this is a beta feature, I think. On one version of the release notes that came out on PDF, it wasn't beta, and in the online ones, it is beta. So I think it's beta. This allows you to find classes that implement an interface, even if they are subclasses of something else that implements that interface and don't directly implement it themselves, which can be useful in certain circumstances. It only works on compiled classes. That's a limitation of the beta. So is valid is true in the list of Apex classes on the setup pages, then that will be included in the search. If is valid is not true, then that will not be there. So advice for this is compile your Apex classes regularly, I guess. So what it allows you to do, if you've got something like an interface there of class info interface, which where you provide a string and a description and an author information about it, then in some other code, you can query for all classes which implement directly or indirectly that interface. So everything that has that. I did a blog about this a little while ago because it looked quite interesting. There's various uses, but for me, I think the most likely use case is going to be for something like plugin rule engine, where if you implement this interface, it can be considered as a rule by the engine. I don't think I'd actually have code deciding what they are and using them all. I'd probably have this code would probably allow me to present the list to an admin and for them to choose which ones they want to use. But with me knowing that they were only able to choose from classes that do implement this interface, they couldn't give an incorrect name or choose something which doesn't and cause it to fail at a runtime. There's a few other scenarios where I can see myself using it in code, but not many, I must admit, or using it directly in code, just finding them and executing them. Normally, I don't like if the code's going to make the decision, then I don't need an awful lot of code to kind of try and move things out into configuration. Which brings us to the end of the what I thought were the interesting features in Spring 22. Does anybody have any questions, thoughts, their ideas of what the better features were that I didn't talk about?
Yeah, that Apex type implementer, could I use that for on a component in the app builder? So when you've got the parameters, that'd be quite a useful thing to then only select. certain classes or things from that as well. Wouldn't that be quite handy?
Yeah, you would be able to do that. You'd be able to have that as one of the parameters in there, yeah, and drop those out.
Nice.
Yeah, the only other one I can think of, so I do have one application where there's I do a bunch of config checks because it's got quite complicated configuration, just to make sure that all the values that are needed have been provided, even if they're wrong. So with that, I could kind of abstract that slightly and have a bunch, as you introduce a new feature, implement that interface, and that'll be run as automatically as a check and will barf if it finds a problem. Yeah, I don't do that very often though, because yeah, it's better to have a nice configuration page than that, I think. It's quite nice to see things like that coming out.
I'll definitely put it to good use. I've got a plugin engine where you can write your own classes, and then everything's decoupled, so you just write the name of the class. So I can use that, for example, to verify the class name is correct, or to show a pick list with the class name instead of having them type it in. Definitely some good use cases for that.
Yep. Yeah, I wonder if that's the influence of Daniel Ballinger, because he's been there for a few months now, and it kind of feels like the useful kind of thing that he might bring to it.
Yeah.
Here's hoping anyway. If nobody else has anything to say, we can move on to the quiz portion and see if anyone was listening to me or paying attention.
Got
Nice.
one very quick one, Keir.
Yeah.
Just because I was paying attention right at the start, I promise. Could you just quickly recap the distortion over secure wrappers, like what that was? Because I honestly was, well, no, I wasn't really. I was kind of distracted. So
Sure. So secure wrappers, it's a combination of secure wrappers and proxies. So it's additional layers, additional hoops that have to be jumped through. So it's slower, and everything had to be written again effectively to pass through information. Distortion is basically messing with the code in the sandbox. So basically duking that code directly. So you're still working directly on that object. Just some of the things you might be expecting aren't there anymore, which is the beauty of JavaScript. You can just go and tinker with things and remove things and add things, and no one knows where they are.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, hang on a minute. I've got a question in the chat. I'll come back to the longer question. But what scenarios do you see Flow Orchestrator being used for? So on our Bright Media project, we had the concept of an ad that goes through a surprising amount of, or can go through a surprising amount of approvals. Depending on what type of thing it is, where it's going, there's just like a whole bunch of rules and we've got loads and loads of code and components that all get dropped in at various points, and things happen to attempt to get control of this stuff. So I would say that would be a really good kind of use case for being able to have all that automation without really having to write all of the code, the user interface code, really, that lets someone know something is there and they need to take action on it. So I think for complicated orchestrations, that seems like quite a useful thing to me. And I think also just that as the things that naturally have a life cycle, things like contracts is probably going to be the standard demo, I'd thought. Maybe recruitment, that someone applies, the CVs go off for review, some people come back and say, yeah, we think it's worth progressing, all of those kind of things where multiple people need to get involved. But you can do it through clicks, not code. And yeah, you've still got to write, even though it's clicks, you're still writing code just in a slightly different medium, for my money. But I think not having to write the UI aspect of it will be really quite useful.
So, Keir, is it performance with a trigger and the complex orchestration of the flow?
So you don't have to, I don't think you have to do anything to detect that it's time for it to go into automation. You've declared those conditions, and I think there's a separate engine that is figuring that out as records change. The flip side is, I would think if you've got loads and loads and loads of automation on something that is being checked every time there's a change to the record, even though it's an orchestrator, it's probably still going to start getting slower and slower and slower. So you'd need to think about that and probably not have too much in the way of complexity to enter that orchestration. And it's probably in a lot of cases going to be is it in it's in this state and it has a couple of other attributes like it's worth this much money or it's with this customer or something along those lines.
Thank you.
Just going to pop back to the chat. Someone asked, is orchestrator free? I believe it is. When I was checking the release notes, I checked this last night because it seemed like something that was quite nice. It basically says generally available in Enterprise, Unlimited, and Performance editions. So seems like at the moment there may not be a charge for it, which is quite remarkable.
There were rumors flying around half a year ago or something like that, when they started talking about orchestrator, that it might be a paid feature. But I think those ended up being baseless. So just people, fearing it might cost money. But I've never seen anything indicating that it actually will.
And I've just seen Richard's comment as well. Did you see the enabled light DOM for third-party integration beta feature? So correct me if I'm wrong, Richard, but that looked like DOM to me.
Well, it's for Lightning components, so you can say, actually, it's not in the shadow tree. So if you've got a third-party thing you want it to reach in, or you want to restyle everything, it says. But I'm like, why would I go to all that effort? Why would I even build it in Lightning if I want to do that? So
yeah, that's very true.
I couldn't work out when I'd use it, but it's there if people want to look at the release notes.
Yeah. When I looked at it, I thought, okay, so it's basically, it's the DOM. I remember how that works. I'm okay with that. How would I get a handle on this?